Hello, I'm Nicholas Markey here, physical therapist, and I'm the owner and physical therapist at Beach Barbell Physical Therapy here in Wilmington by day, and I'm an online fitness coach with my other company, Beach Barbell Training LLC, by night. Today, I wanted to kind of start a series going into the topic of pain and our modern understanding of pain. So let's go through just a little bit of history. Scientifically, pain probably started being talked about more with Descartes, where there's a famous picture of the person standing next to a fire, their foot's right next to the fire, and then there's sort of like a little thing happening in the foot, and then you see this line drawn all the way up the leg to the brain, and in the brain there's like a little bell being rung. So the idea being that there's some sort of like damage, and then pain signals are shot up the all the way up to the brain, and then telling the brain that hey, we have pain. As we've progressed in our understanding of the human body, we've come to understand that there's all sorts of other things going on. So basically, what you have is a nervous system. Okay, nervous system makes up your brain, all your nerves in your body that connect into muscles and skin and just about every tissue in your body to kind of sample what's going on in the environment. Just get data basically. Um, and then that data is brought back eventually to the brain and then shuffled to different parts of the brain for processing for you to essentially enjoy the reality you get to enjoy. It's all very matrix like. So basically, you have what are called neurons. Neurons are the functional units of the nervous system. There's other cells within the nervous system, glial cells and astrocytes and whatnot, myelin cell sheath cells to help protect the neurons and improve speed of the conductivity. But let's just kind of focus on the neurons. Essentially, how they operate is they get some sort of stimulus, okay, and then they have a line which is where they will or won't fire. So neurons are only on or off, they don't partially go. So either they fire or they don't. So the stimulus has to reach a certain threshold. Oftentimes it's called negative 70 millivolts in the textbooks, but I'm sure it could be different for different cases, and we'll talk about that more as we go on. So once it fires off, essentially like an electrical signal, fires up the neuron, and then it'll connect to another neuron, and then it'll attempt to stimulate that neuron. And again, if it meets that threshold, then that neuron will get stimulated, and it'll shoot it up to the next neuron. And for your sensory system, so this is the system that we were talking about of sampling data in the environment, the stuff in your muscles, your skin, surrounding your bone and vessels and all sorts of tissues in your body. You essentially have basically a kind of a three-chain system. So you have the first order neuron, which connects to whatever tissue it is, like skin, we'll say, or muscle. And then that neuron will go to the spinal cord, and in the spinal cord it'll plug into another neuron. This will be the second order neuron, and then that neuron will go all the way up to the brain, kind of in the center of the brain in an area called the thalamus. And the thalamus is kind of, you can call it a relay center. It's kind of like the train station, and it's going to send that information to the relevant parts of the brain. So connecting from the thalamus to other parts of the brain, those are the third order neurons. So you got basically kind of think of like three extension cords plugged into each other in a way. So when we're talking about pain, pain doesn't exist as far as we know until your brain determines it. So it's not an input per se, it's more of an output, we say. Pain is an output of the brain, okay? And so what does this mean? So the idea is that there are no necessary, they're not necessarily pain neurons. There are what we call nociceptor neurons, and that essentially just refers to kind of a toxic, relatively sort of stimulus or something. So basically, this nociceptor, and there's different kinds, but that's not really necessary for you to know, um, will get stimulated by something, whether that thing is actually direct damage or just enough to stimulate that nociceptor, and then it'll get fired up, to the spinal cord, and then the spinal cord up into the thalamus, and then the thalamus out to parts of the brain. And then in the brain is sort of where there's a lot of processing going on to kind of figure out what's maybe appropriate. Okay. So this is why you can potentially have pain when there isn't really damage necessarily, right? Like if say that there's something hot, like really hot, like a flame, and you put your hand just over it and it's really hot, you may not be causing damage, but it can hurt and, make you pull it away. So there's nociceptors firing, most likely, and then eventually gets to the brain, and your brain's like, dude, that's fire. If you do hold your hand there long enough, yeah, you will burn yourself and you will cause damage to yourself. But oftentimes for most people, it'll hurt plenty before you ever get to that point, because why would your body and brain want you to damage yourself, right? So it's going to probably stop you beforehand. So you can kind of think of it that pain sometimes is almost like anticipation of potential damage, and not necessarily always damage. And of course, you could have damage, like, something's, cut, like you got a cut on your skin, and, oftentimes those sting, right? And then your body's making you feel that, and then you go and look at it, and you're like, oh, I got a cut, and then you clean it up and bandage it and all that good stuff. But the interesting thing about that situation is, you have a cut, which is damage to your skin, right? And, potential source of infection, which can be serious, potentially. Your brain is getting, signals of some sort of, nociceptor activity, potential damage. You then look down, giving more data to your brain. You go, oh, wow, I do have a cut. It's bleeding a little bit. Okay. You clean it up. And then oftentimes you don't feel much pain after that. You still, under that bandage, you still have damage, right? Your body's going to be gradually healing that over the next few days and weeks or so. But you still have damage, and there's still most likely signals saying damage going up the spot, up from that tissue up into the spinal cord and up into the brain. But from your brain's perspective, once it's processed it, it's going to say, well, yeah, we know, we've assessed it, and we've taken care of the problem, and most likely it's not going to output pain unless you start to really mess with it again. So that's kind of the nervous system in general. What I like to think of it like is that nervous system, and to be fully real, it's very linked up with your immune system too, your white blood cells and stuff, things that fight off infection and whatnot. But that's not super relevant right now to just understanding kind of how pain works. I like to think of it in terms of sort of a protection system, right? So it's trying to protect you and assess threat, okay? And when you think of threat, there's many more variables than just damage, right? There's potential damage. There's also the context, right? What's going on in the situation? What is a higher priority? There's a kind of that old, I don't know how old it is, but there's kind of the story of like, hey, you're in the middle of the woods and you sprain your ankle really bad, but there's a bear chasing you, which is kind of crazy. Probably you're not going to feel that ankle. What if it's broken? Your body's going to be like, well, what's a bigger threat, bear or ankle? Okay, so bear chasing you down. You get away, hopefully. You're hiding out, bear's gone, you're probably at that point the threat, the threat from the bear is gone, and then but your ankles now your next threat, and potentially now you're going to start to feel more pain from that area. So kind of looking at priorities there. You can also think of in terms of safety, right? Kind of similar situation there, but we all know the stories of like, the kid falls down on the ground, lands on their knee, they start, crying, run to mom or dad, and they're looking for safety, right? Trying to assess, they're trying to help, they're trying to understand and assess the situation, and that's where the parent comes in. Now, if the parent reacts kind of like very, freaking out, you're going to probably elevate the assessment of threat to the child, right? And so if the parent's more, just supportive and say, hey, let's check it out, you move it around a little bit, maybe, you touch it, wipe off any dirt or gravel or whatever, make sure there's no like nasty abrasions or anything. Everything looks good, they're moving it okay. And, generally within that minute, you're like, they're back on their bike or whatever, running around again. So you've assessed it, you've helped them assess it, and you help reduce the threat. Okay. And this is the same context that a patient, someone suffering from some sort of pain may be experiencing as well. They have some sort of pain, they're trying to understand it, they're trying to figure out what's going on. They go to a healthcare, provider, say, hey, I got this thing, let me tell you about it, blah, 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 blah. They assess it, they check it out. Oftentimes, one, pains are going to go away regardless, but two, you kind of give someone a good amount of assessment and reassurance and assessing of that threat, you reduce that threat, oftentimes that person's back to living and moving in no time, just like that kid. They're the same human being, but they're a little older and probably have other things going on in their life. And so this is where threat kind of gets expanded, right? Because unfortunately, we're probably a protection system is probably going to default to more negative, right? Because it wants you to survive, right? It's going to say, well, look, this back pain could be a really bad thing. What if it hurts so bad you can't do your job? And then what if you lose your job and then you lose your house and then you're on the street? Da, 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 da. Sounds crazy, but I've even, when I've had weird pains and, was trying to figure out what was going on, even as a physical therapist who understands his pain stuff, my brain has gone down that rabbit hole. So, having someone in there, that provides proper reassurance, proper assessment, and encouragement, and the reassurance and the education to get that person going again can be very critical, just like having that parent there to provide that support and encouragement and reassurance to their kid when they fall off the bike. So key takeaway from this I'd like you to take is think of pain more as like your protective system and more related to threat. Okay. When you think of it that way, you can start to think of what variables may increase threat in my situation. Okay. What variables may increase safety feeling in my situation, right? It's not just going to be, oh, there's damage to the area that's hurting. Okay. It may have damage. Frankly, it's hard to say whether we know if it's actually the damage to that area or if it is just the area got really sensitive and the body's freaking out, and maybe there's really no damage, but the body is like getting really overprotective. It's hard to say. So either way, the safety and the threat are where you want to focus. So then you get more variables to work on. So thank you for watching. I'm going to keep this series going, hitting different topics to help you understand pain, explain pain a little bit better. Comment, like, subscribe, share. Let me know what you think. Thank you.